Hi, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Dave, and we're the IB English guys. Today we're going to talk about literary forms, otherwise known as genres, and why it's so important to consider the literary form before we launch into our analysis.
That's right, Mr. Jaws. We've been looking at paper twos, higher level essays, individual orals, and it always strikes me how it seems like some students don't really consider the literary form, hence we're making this video. Mr. Jaws, what are some important things to think about, and why is it so important to consider literary form?
Well, first of all, we want to think about understanding. So when we're looking at our literary forms and we're thinking about that, this helps us with our understanding of that text. We're thinking about how the author is doing things in this literary form to shape meaning and talk about rich ideas. This is about our understanding.
Yeah, of course, that's criterion A for most assessments. When you think about criterion B, you're thinking about those authorial choices. It's really helpful to consider the literary form. Obviously, if you're looking at drama, you're thinking about stage directions and sound and what you can see. If it's a novel, you're thinking about narrative perspective and structure. So knowing the literary form really does assist you when making choices and thinking about authorial choices.
Lastly, we want to think about when we're writing a paper too, we're asked to compare things and look for similarities and differences. And of course, the literary forms can help us find great comparative points. If we choose two different literary forms like drama and novel, this gives us rich things to talk about. Right? If we're talking about the same literary form, that can also provide us with some interesting comparative points. So I think that's another aspect that's helpful.
Yeah, now Mr. Giles, now that we've talked a little bit about why it's so important to talk about the genre and the literary form, let's look at some specific ones and talk about the attributes of each individual form. Why don't we start with novels?
Yeah, absolutely. Novels are written in prose. They're meant to be written, again, it's about the reading experience, and usually it's a rich reading experience that you do over multiple sittings, and we want to think about the richness of novels and how complex they are.
Yeah, you might want to think about the narrative point of view. Who's narrating? Does the narrator change? Is the narrator reliable? Is it someone you can trust? So really considering the narrative point of view and how it might alter or change throughout the novel is very important to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, we want to think about character development, how characters evolve over time, how they change, what their relationships are. So thinking about character is a great thing to talk about with novels.
Structure of novels is also something to consider. You might want to ask yourself, is this a linear novel? Is this non-linear? Are there huge gaps in time? How is the author crafting the structure of the novel to help communicate the theme or the rich idea?
That's great. And then of course we've got the beginning, middle, end of the structure. We also think about the passage of time. How much time elapses? Is this over the course of 2 weeks? Is it actually multiple generations of 50 years? What is the passage of time? That's really interesting to talk about.
Of course, when looking specifically at the language itself, you'll be looking for figurative language, descriptive language, dialogue, all those rich features that novelists use, you'll be paying attention to that. But we really want to make sure that we have that novel in our mind and remember, hey, this is a novel, I should be talking about these aspects.
Yeah, that's great. Let's go on to the next literary form, and that's drama. Drama is meant for the stage. Unlike a novel, a play is meant to be seen. It's meant to be witnessed. And whenever I teach drama, I always want my students to see the plays. So by all means, make sure you engage with the play. What are some things we want to think about with drama?
Mr. Giles, the theatrical elements is the first thing I think about. I'm thinking about lighting, sound, props, costumes, stage directions, blocking, where people are standing, how they're positioned. There's just so many great things to think about. You can find those in the stage directions quite often.
Yeah, that's awesome. We don't have a narrator usually with drama. We don't have someone standing on stage narrating, so we want to look at dialogue. This is how we learn about the characters and what they say and how they act. So again, dialogue's important.
Also, you want to think about structure with drama as well. How many acts? Is it the traditional 3-act play? Is it a 5-act play? What's going on? And how is that play structured? And what did the author gain by structuring the play in that particular fashion?
Yeah, we also think about that story mountain with exposition, rising action, climax, and the falling action, and the resolution. That's all part of the structure.
You like that story mountain, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I think it's helpful. Okay, we also, much like drama, we want to think about characters. How do the characters, undergo a journey in the text? How do they change? How do they evolve? And what are their relationships? Okay, let's go on to the next literary form.
Poetry. Mr. Giles, I love poetry. Poems are just these little self-contained, complete texts. What are some aspects we want to think about when we look at poetry?
I think we want to think about, first of all, we want to think about the speaker and the point of view. Who is the speaker of this poem, and how can I talk about that speaker and how they are reflecting the ideas?
Yeah, because it's a poem, it's going to be very rich in imagery and figurative language, most likely. So we want to really take our time and unpack those and think about similes, metaphors, personifications. Think about the different different types of imagery. Don't just say imagery, be specific and think about exactly what type of imagery.
Yeah, we might want to think about the metrical and rhythmic patterns in poetry that we can talk about. Is it free verse? Is it a certain rhythm? Is it a certain meter? These are things to pay attention to.
We also want to think about the structure of poems as well. And we can also think about the form, kind of the shape. Can you talk a little bit about that, Mr. Giles?
Yeah, well, is it broken down into equal stanzas? Is it broken down? Is it a one stanza poem? How is that structured and how is that put together? Does it have a lot of enjambment? These are all structural elements of poetry.
We want to think about sound as well. We want to listen for plosives. Is there euphony? Is there cacophony? We want to think about, is there alliteration? How do the sounds manipulate the meaning of the poem? And remember, poets are very intentional about how they make those sound devices pop.
Yeah, and the last thing is that poetry is emotional. Poetry is beautiful. We want to think about the emotions. We want to look for tone shifts and think about the emotions that are conveyed. Don't forget that if you're writing on the paper too, short texts need friends. You need to talk about more than one poem, preferably 3 poems that you're going to unpack and discuss in the paper too.
Yeah, definitely.
Same thing with HL essay. One poem doesn't cut it.
Short text needs friends. Now, one thing we would like to really focus on now is graphic novels. We have seen many students write about Persepolis and other graphic novels. Sadly, students often don't do it correctly. Mr. Giles, can you talk about the importance of the graphic novel when we're thinking about genre? What do we need to focus on?
Well, we want to think about, first of all, it's the interplay between visual art and written text and written narrative. So it's storytelling plus the visuals. So we want to think about this sequential art, how the sequence of panels, how the panels are put together. This is, again, a starting place.
Yeah, maybe you have one large panel that takes up a whole page. Maybe you have multiple frames and panels taking up pages. Think about that. How is the sequence established? Also, when looking at those panels, you want to think about the shading. You want to think about color, graphic weight, symbols, really getting into the visual aspect, because as Mr. Giles said, it's the interplay between the visual and the language. We can't do one without the other.
We can also think about point of view. We can think about the perspective. Again, we can almost look at a panel like it's a camera. So we're thinking about the perspective and how that's shaping our thinking.
Is it an extreme close-up? Is it a long shot? That's what we're thinking about with perspective. Lastly, you might want to think about the character design. Look at the body language. Look at the facial expressions. Think about the scale. Are they large? Are they small? Those can really give a lot of information and help you articulate the main ideas of the piece.
That's great. Okay, the last literary form we want to talk about briefly is short stories. Again, very concise and contained form of storytelling.
Yeah, there's your story mountain again, Mr. Giles. You have exposition, inciting incident. You have rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. Definitely talk about these aspects if you're exploring short stories.
Yeah, stories are usually about characters, and we want to think about that character development, and does that character undergo change and transformation? What can we say about the characters' relationships, etc.?
Yeah, because short stories are quite short, you'll often see the setting and the atmosphere packed in really tightly, sometimes at the beginning, and see how authors really bring out that time and space early through that descriptive language. Look for that. That will help you shape meaning.
Yeah, much like novels, we want to think about narrative point of view and how the point of view is going to, again, shape our thinking and shape meaning. That's another great talking point.
You're doing great. Take the last one.
Okay, imagery. The last one's just imagery and rich figurative language. Again, these are very concise and powerful stories. We want to think about, are there some different symbols or aspects we can talk about with figurative language?
Yeah, folks, in the end, we wanted to make this video to remind you that, yes, sometimes you want to get into the minutia, the nitty-gritty of the text, but we can't forget these overarching macro elements, looking at the literary form and considering genre. In closing, Mr. Giles, that's important because
it's important because it's going to help us understand the text better and talk about the text better. And I think stepping back and thinking about the literary form is a great entry point.
So students, don't forget to step back and look at that, and then step back in and watch us in our next video. We'll continue with talking about some other broad authorial choices. Thanks for joining the channel. See you next time.
Bye, guys.